So today we're going to take a look at part 2 of starting a disability ministry, and we talked to our special education consultant, Leah Wicker, about the 3 points of positive behavior support. So glad you're here today. When it comes to church, one thing we can all agree on is that it should be for everyone, including people who have disabilities that impact their behavior. But creating supportive environments takes more than just good intentions. It takes planning and partnership. And that can leave leaders saying, I don't know where to start. Starting a Disability Ministry, Part 2, Positive Behavior Support. The first way to make your church more supportive for students who have disabilities is to make it more supportive for everyone. That's right. The success strategies that are essential for students who have intellectual and developmental disabilities are actually helpful for every student. So the best way to get a disability ministry initiative started is by incorporating positive behavior support into every classroom. The way you do this is by understanding what things can lead to challenging behavior to begin with, like feeling anxious. When a person feels anxious, they often act out in ways that are not helpful. So identifying triggers and reducing them can lead to a calmer classroom. So how do you know what might make a student feel anxious? Well, what are some things that make you feel anxious? How about not knowing what to expect? Or not feeling ready for something? And what about being trapped in an environment that feels overwhelming? Do any of those things make you feel anxious? Well, they can make your students feel anxious too. And feeling anxious often comes out in challenging behavior, especially for students who don't have the communication or coping skills they need to talk through their feelings. So the first way to positively support behavior is by reducing classroom triggers that commonly cause anxiety. Let's start with not knowing what to expect. Think about the last time someone expected something from you, but you really didn't know what it was. What happened next? Did you guess right? Were you wrong? If you were wrong, did the person get upset with you? How did that feel? Yeah, that's stressful. You probably weren't at your best, were you? Well, neither are your students. So set clear expectations about what students are supposed to do and how they're supposed to behave. Cutting down on confusion will create a happier classroom. Okay, now on to the next thing. Transitions, or switching from one thing to the next, are a common place where students melt down. This is often because little to no warning is given before the switch is made. Think about it for a minute. Say you're enjoying your morning coffee and suddenly your boss calls and says, "It's time for the meeting right now!" How are you feeling? Calm and happy? Or stressed and frazzled? Well, abruptly shifting from one thing to the next is hard for most people, but it can be extraordinarily hard for many students with disabilities. So learning how to get students prepared to switch activities ahead of time can reduce frustration and challenging behaviors. So try giving a 2-minute warning and using visual aids. Okay, there's one more anxiety trigger we want to talk about today. Wait, can you hear me? Over here! Look past the flashing lights! I said pay attention to what I'm trying to teach you! Why can't you focus? What's the matter? When the environment gets loud or crowded or filled with other stimuli, anyone can be overloaded. But for many people, especially those on the autism spectrum, sensory overload can create intense anxiety and can even lead to the fight or flight response. So one of the best ways to reduce challenging behavior in the classroom is to create a calmer environment. Keep music volume low, avoid fragrances, and dim the lights. And understand that some people may still need an even calmer environment, so have noise-canceling headphones and a quiet space available. The next way to create a supportive environment for disability inclusion is by making sure that you have the tools you need when you need them. An easy way to do this is by putting together a buddy box. Buddy boxes are boxes filled with items that a disability ministry buddy may use to help support a student. Things like fidgets, sensory items, calming tools, and don't forget those noise-canceling headphones. And you'll want to include visual aids to help with communication too. This is very important. Remember when we talked about reducing anxiety by communicating expectations and preparing for transitions? Well, using visual aids is the key to how to do this for many students with disabilities who are visual learners. So some of the things you may want to include would be visual schedules, first then boards or now next rings, and visual timers. To learn more about classroom tools and how to use them, please watch Wonderful Works Talks Supportive Resources. Now that we've looked at ways to make your church environments more generally inclusive, what about those students who will require even further support? How do you help them? First, recognize that training all of your volunteers the basics of positive behavior support is key to success, but also recognize that some students will still require either a one-on-one buddy or a separate classroom designed just for special education. So how do you help these students feel welcome? Well, start by talking to parents or caregivers and learning more about them. What are their strengths? What is challenging? What things should you know to keep them safe? Partnering with families is the best way to create successful plans, but this doesn't always look the same. Sometimes a family will reach out before bringing their child to church to make sure that you're equipped to serve them. This is a great opportunity to get a lot of information up front. You can start by telling them more about your church and sending them a Disability Ministry Child Information form that has a lot of specific questions on it. And once you receive that back, you can follow up with a phone call to talk further. This is a great time to start building relationships. Then invite the family into helping you plan for how to introduce their child to your church. For some students, just being dropped off at a classroom door and waving goodbye is fine, but others may need a slower transition in. A social story or even a few practice visits before Sunday can help. Now, sometimes a new student will show up when you aren't expecting it, and if their family tells you that they have a disability and may need some accommodations, then be ready to gather the information you need to make them feel comfortable and safe. It can help to have a Disability Ministry quick question list on hand to make sure you remember to ask the right questions before the student is dropped off. And once your new student becomes a regular, make sure to keep building those relationships because partnering with families is the best way to support your student and your church for the long term. Woo! Well, I think we learned a lot about positive behavior support today. What do you think? Let's get started. But there's one more thing before you go. The best way to understand what positive behavior support really looks like in the classroom is by seeing it in action. So check out Wonderful Works Disability Ministry in the Classroom to see real teachers and real students using the techniques that we talked about today. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.